Hi, Chris McCabe. We're here to talk about the Seller Velocity Conference. I'm here to have a conversation with Levy of CNBC. He's covered tech, and you worked at Bloomberg for many years. You've covered Amazon for several years. Just to jump right into it, since we're a few minutes late, do you think it's changed over the years? Or do you think this kinds of stories you cover now, the kinds of people you talk to, are pretty much the same as maybe a couple of years ago when we first met?
No, I would say it's definitely evolved. Amazon's just gotten bigger. In basically every facet. So, it's always, since I've been covering tech for the last 10 years, Amazon's been the e-commerce leader. That's been consistent. But over the past decade, it's gone from being, a leading e-commerce company to being one of the largest software companies in the world. I believe it's number 5 as far as revenue in terms of enterprise software. It's become a huge technology platform for things like voice. So we now look at Amazon as sort of this massive global Goliath that everyone on the team is committed to covering in pretty good depth.
All right. Do you think that there are certain questions they're more willing to answer or less willing to answer now when you contact Amazon Media Relations versus, like I said, 2 or 3 years ago when you started? Are there certain taboo subjects? Or has the number of taboo subjects grown or shrunk?
I think the bigger they get and the more powerful they get, the more secretive they become. So they're not generally willing. In fact, several people on our team have been quite good about finding ways to uncover things about what's happening through the various ways that they list job searches. We have a lot of internal contacts. The more they find out that we're onto them about something internal, the more secretive they become, and they've gotten really good at sort of the non-denial denial.
Is there like a ready-made example that's your favorite, or I don't mean to?
Yeah, I mean, we had a couple of people on our team broke one of the health labs that they're working on, and it was through some job postings, but then getting confirmations, and they took the listings down, and so. It was sort of their way of saying nothing's happening and those listings don't exist. They've, consistently denied they're working on certain projects that we know they're working on because people are telling us about the things.
It's leaks, or it's industry analysts and experts get exposed to certain kinds of information and then they forward it on to you.
Yeah, I mean, the really secretive stuff tends to have to, at some point, it has to come internally. On Marketplace, and we'll talk a lot about this. I mean, we get a lot of tips about various things that are changing there from sellers, and they, when we will send them a copy of a screenshot of something we have, and at that point, it's really not to their advantage to deny it any longer. They'll try and put the most positive spin on it they can.
Right. And do they typically say something like, "Well, we're aware of this already, and we're working on it"? Or do they sometimes try to get more information from you about, "Oh, what are you hearing?" so that we can, task our people appropriately?
Yeah, they'll. So if I come to them with, I'm hearing this thing from a group of sellers, or, a number of sellers have come to me with this, and it seems to be a pretty significant deal. They will try and get as much information as possible as they can. And I'm actually as forthcoming as I can be. I mean, I want to give them everything I know. I have to tell them everything I'm
You're not cagey about it. Well, I've heard certain things from certain people.
And the truth is, I often know more than they do. So I actually am informing them. And very often it's, I'll spend an hour on the phone with someone going through all the things I have, the things we're going to report, send them screenshots. And then, in response, I'll get we're not going to comment beyond our standard, we have no tolerance for counterfeits policy.
And of course it could be a useful situation where you're giving them something they can act on. There was one occasion, a couple of years ago, where you heard about something, or, a few sellers contacted you about it. And then I heard from seller relations at Amazon, do you have examples? Do you have use cases? And so we were kind of helping them get on the right path, at least, because they weren't sure what was triggering the problem at the time. So it's not necessarily calling them out, for something like, "Hey, we had sellers report something that you're not aware of."
Yeah, and it helps.
That's not very productive.
Right, and it helps. I mean, if it is a really, really specific example, the PR person actually needs to know the person. They need as many specifics as possible to know who to go to, right? Because they're
so many teams, so many people.
So in the absence of, full disclosure, they actually may not be able to get me any information.
Right. And have you ever tried to talk to different people on the S team versus, do they have a subject matter expert who's maybe a middle level or upper middle level management type, and they communicate? PR? Yeah. Do they go through media relations with everything? Or are you ever directly on the phone with maybe somebody on my former teams, or if not that, then a manager who oversees?
So Amazon does not tend to put me on the phone with executives for marketplace related stories.
Right.
I've gotten interviews with Andy Jassy, the head of AWS.
Right.
I've gotten interviews with Werner Vogels, the CTO of the company. We'll get executives. We'll get interviews with C-level executives at events where we're talking about these big sweeping topics. But when it's, I'm hearing 7 sellers who are telling me about, this suspension issue that they're facing. We really need to get to the bottom of it. Can you put me on the phone with, the best person and investigate?
Right.
That doesn't happen. It's
or they tell you that they'll look into it and get back to you. Maybe you don't hear back from them, or you get some other answer.
Typically I will get either a no comment or an emailed comment from someone in PR, and it's a very canned statement. It's a cut and paste job.
I would think sometimes it's just a matter of a tool breaking, right? And that happens. These are technical mishaps, and these things can go wrong within any company.
Yeah.
So, sometimes it's not a human error, and it's something that you can really just say, we identified it. This has happened with AWS a couple times, right? So, that can be kind of a straightforward explanation. It doesn't have to be something that has to be swept under the rug.
Yeah, I think my sense is that they don't want to get in the habit of providing detailed responses every time we come to them with one of these seller stories.
On the defensive kind of.
They want to know, and again, I'm happy to give them as much information as I can, but I think they view it as an imposition for them to have to put resources into responding every time.
Right. So just a reminder, put your questions below the video. We have a fascinating person here that we're talking to. Ari Levy of CNBC has covered Amazon for a while. Was at Bloomberg before CNBC. How many years have you been at CNBC? Maybe I'll give you a second bio.
So I started at Bloomberg in 2003 in New York. I was covering Wall Street and the stock market for a couple of years. I moved out to San Francisco in 2006 with Bloomberg, covered tech there from 2006 until the middle of 2014, and then joined CNBC. At the time, CNBC was basically just a news TV network with a digital operation on the East Coast. I joined as part of a twofold build out. One was to help build our San Francisco bureau, which we didn't have at the time, and the other was as part of an effort to go big on digital. And in the subsequent 3.5 years, we've done both, and now we've got a team of 6 reporters, 2 editors. I'm an editor, and 4 to 5 digital video people, all in San Francisco. And we also have a smaller team on the East Coast.
Right. Okay. So definitely, this is somebody you want to ask interesting questions to. I'm sure he'll have good responses. And just some background. You've called me a few times to ask if I
more than a few
to ask. You get contacted by sellers and they report things to you. You want to see if I've heard about it from other people. And of course, it works the other way as well. Sometimes I'm hearing a ton of stuff and I want to see if Ari's working on a story about it because it's clearly impacting dozens, hundreds, perhaps low thousands and numbers of sellers. It could be account suspension related. We've talked about, I don't know how many different issues around selling, how to sell in the marketplace in a way that Amazon will tolerate, appreciate. There's compliance issues that come up. When you're in conversations with sellers, what would you say is the biggest? Are you just getting a steady stream of anxiety? Are you talking to people who are losing money every minute that they're talking to you and they've lost their top selling listing? What do they think you can do for them? Are they looking for information from you, or are they trying to kind of find a shoulder to cry on?
I think so. The one, very high level, the thing that I've noticed in my conversations with sellers over the last few years, and this is, this gets heightened sort of by the minute, is the amount of sleep that sellers lose when Amazon is their primary marketplace. It's gotten more and more stressful. That's one thing I've recognized. And it's gotten more stressful for people who don't sell on Amazon, but they're concerned about Amazon, their product being infringed upon on Amazon. And so even if you are really good about controlling your distribution and controlling your product, and you are clear that you're not a vendor, you don't have a seller relationship, you still have to police the marketplace.
There are these porous gaps.
Or you have to make the decision not to, right? You have to, I talk to plenty of people who just have these lifestyle businesses, and they say, look, I know that people are stealing my product on Amazon. I cannot spend my day policing that site, or I will go crazy. It's not worth it.
They'd have to hire a raft of attorneys, compliance agencies. Maybe they're too small for that.
Yeah, then you police it, and then what do you do? So I think as far as what people want from me, I mean, it varies. I would say generally they want me to know their point of view on what the problem is, see if I'm hearing similar things, and then they typically are interested in how it can be crafted into a story, with the caveat that, as we've talked about, very few people want to go on the record. Right.
And we had a question that just came in that there's a seller who considers going to the media all the time. But what kinds of stories should they go to the media? I mean, I know you're going to qualify, well, it depends on the details, right? But what kinds of stories are you looking to talk to sellers about more than others, if there's any way to answer that?
I mean, I think, in general, I will hop on the phone with most sellers who want to talk, because typically they're only going to get in touch with me if they really do have a story to tell. That doesn't mean we're going to write it, but I for me, information is valuable in whatever capacity. So I'm not always going to be able to make the time for it, but I try to.
I mean, there's a lot of emotion there, right?
There is.
Sometimes maybe they're assuming you're going to do a story if they call you and they're upset enough.
I mean, I will say, for people who don't want to go on the record, which is the vast majority, and I totally get it. I don't need explanations as to why you don't want to go on the record, but you do have to understand, if you don't go on the record, it makes it harder to do the story, because we have to do that much more. We have to corroborate everything above and beyond. If we are able to attach your name to something and we can validate the credibility of your story, the hurdle to getting that published is much lower. It still has to be compelling.
Right.
I think, and the thing, we are storytellers. We need our time to be valuable, and we need readers to want to read the story.
Right.
So
it's still a business. There's still advertising involved.
So
there's a delicate balance.
I think, if you can imagine, if you're a seller and you can imagine your story showing up on the front page of the business section of the New York Times on a Sunday, and people wanting to read every paragraph. If you can imagine that, that's the type of story we want. It doesn't mean it excludes everything else, because you might have something that's not so compelling, or you may not feel comfortable. You may not feel that you can provide those sorts of details, but it may fit into a trend that helps us validate something we're working on.
And there's a fine line, right? Because sometimes people are numb to this stuff. Like, if you have a trend, but then there's tons of stories about something, like the best example I can think of is the Whole Foods acquisition. I mean, there was a glut of stories on that. Everyone had to cover it because it was a big deal and it was a huge business impact. But at the same time, where's the line drawn? I mean, another example is all the stories about counterfeit products being sold, where they come from, how is the problem being solved on the inside Amazon. Is it getting better? Is it getting worse? There's so many stories about counterfeit. So if it's something like that obvious, where the integrity of the marketplace would be questioned, and anytime a particular brand kept resurfacing as having too many counterfeits sold on Amazon, does that make it less worthy of a story? Is Amazon sort of like, people aren't paying attention to these stories, they've heard this 17 times already?
If it's just another example, and I don't mean to say just in that, like, if it's your livelihood, it's not just another example. But if it's the same thing where you have an invention, or you have a private label, and there are a bunch of counterfeits that show up, and you're spending all your time sending in takedown notices, and Amazon's not listening, and every time you get one taken down, 10 more pop up.
Well, or you get some action, but it's so temporary that it has no effect.
I get people's lives are being destroyed by this. That story is one, it was a really prescient, it's a really important story about 2 years ago when no one really, outside of the Amazon marketplace, people weren't aware it was happening. Now it's a fairly well understood and retold story. But as we've talked about many times, the sellers have gotten smarter in terms of controlling their product, and the black hats have gotten smarter in terms of how they exploit it, right? So we start to see these new tactics. And so when we get stories about, okay, it looks like the seller's doing the right thing, it kind of looks like Amazon's actually doing the right thing, and yet there's this whole new problem that's emerged where, and there's a lot of drama to it, right? So, we do those stories.
Yeah. Do you check out seller forums for content? I mean, apart from people calling you or emailing you, do you jump in and out of these Facebook groups? I mean, some of them are closed groups and you can't, just do that. But seller forums, there's information there. Just a personal note. I mean, I kind of stopped going to the seller forums because there's so much contradictory information and there were so many different people comparing apples to oranges. Your case with your account is the same as mine. And then of course, if you actually dug into the details, you'd probably find that wasn't the case. Is that, do you utilize the forums at all, or do you?
Yeah, I mean, they can serve as evidence of something. They can help, corroborate something you're working with. It's not, I wouldn't say it's a central piece of what I'm doing, but I definitely, I mean, on any given subject, if you type in, if it's a controversial subject and you type in Amazon and that subject, there's a good chance that a seller forum will be the top 3 links. And I'll certainly click on them and see what people are saying. Sometimes the information is helpful. I've noticed, I mean, the seller forums have gotten less helpful because I think you're able to get things taken out of the forums if you're mentioning specific names. So there are ways that it used to be useful that it no longer is. The Facebook forums can be great. I don't look at them every day. So I'm not seeing every new post, but sometimes people will flag me, and it's a good. I mean, if there's an interesting thread happening that I should know about, that's a good way for me to know about it. Is if someone tags me on it.
Right. So I mean, there's things that affect everyone's livelihood and their daily existence as a seller. Do you hear from buyers too? Do they read your past stories and they feel deceived by some? I mean, Amazon's known for taking care of their buyers, right? Above everybody, even themselves. So I recently got a message. Somebody was saying they won't let me review products anymore. They think I was induced to write a certain kind of positive review. I'm a 70-year-old widower, and I just do this because I enjoy it. Now, of course, somebody just coming through my contact form on the website could be anybody. I mean, I don't necessarily independently verify unless I get them on the phone and get an idea of where. But I do hear from some buyers sometimes who feel like, Amazon didn't treat me the way I wanted to be treated. And now I feel kind of disgruntled. Is there somebody I can talk to about?
So I don't get people asking me for advice as buyers, but I do get, after I'll do a story that gets a lot of traction in this general subject matter, I will get people on Twitter who will sort of tweet at me with the story and say, interesting, I just purchased this thing and what I got was something totally different than what I bought. And I contacted Amazon about it and, went through this black hole. One of the interesting things, lots of coworkers who have had, bizarre,
your coworkers,
bizarre experiences on Amazon, but they've never really thought much about it. Have subsequently said, maybe I should have done a little bit of research onto what I was, there's this sort of,
like you have to go back to your billing statements, and I've heard stories like that.
Like why was it that I ordered Duracell and I got Dual Cell or something? I think that there is. I mean, Amazon does a really good job, as we know, of making it look like as a buyer, making it look like your purchase experience is authentic. Even if it often isn't. And you sort of trust that it is based on the experience that you have and then like something weird happens, and you may or may not question it.
Right. I mean, obviously there are some people out there who know Amazon's reputation for protecting buyer experience. They might try to exploit that for free stuff.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely happens.
And one issue sellers face is, buyers making up a reason why they have to return something so that they don't have to pay return shipping.
Yeah.
So they might make up a reason that triggers an investigation by my former teams. This wasn't as described. The listing doesn't match the product. This isn't authentic. Things like that.
Yeah.
Would Amazon actually, do they take those claims from the buyers at face value? Or, I don't know. I mean, in your opinion, do you think they understand that these dynamics are out there?
Yeah. So, I mean, there was when Amazon started enforcing the returns policy for marketplace participants, I got more of an uproar. I got as much of an uproar from sellers over that story after that story published as I had probably anything, out of concern that it was going to kill their business. Right? I mean, people who are selling products that they don't want the product returned.
Right.
And so now, there's all this incentive for buyers to buy it and get a refund and still keep it. I
mean, if you abuse it, they do close your buyer account. I mean, not everyone just keeps doing this over and over. Yeah.
But I haven't heard that much about it since it was instituted. So I don't know if that means that Amazon's actually figured out a pretty good way to police that, or if, I don't know, people don't complain to me about everything.
Right. It's one of those things that they're continually working on. Sometimes they experiment a little, try this process, they do it with sellers too. They're experimenting now with sending you a message before you get suspended. You will be suspended if you don't present a proper plan that addresses these complaints, these problems. So that's kind of an experiment. They've gone back and forth. Just for another seller example, phone calls. You sent us a plan of action. We don't think it's sufficient, but we're calling you to talk you through it a little bit. So they try these different kind of pilot programs. Yep. They've moved things around with account management. Now it's called marketplace growth management, and it's sort of strategic account management and account management merged together, and seller support plus. So, I mean, they're willing to try new things. I don't know how much they talk to you about sort of like we're initiating a new program. Sellers will be much happier with us and less likely to, call you because they're afraid of losing their account.
Again, so those are the types of things when we get wind of a new program for sellers, they will not deny. They'll give us a statement, and they'll typically give us a sort of a very positive spin on that statement. Like, we're always improving the experience and this is even better. And in the trials that we've done, we've had better result, 10% improvement in result. So they may give.
They don't feel the need to give more of an answer.
Right.
Do you think? I mean, we're getting to the point where they're so powerful. They're such a giant chunk of the economy. Eventually, they'll just say, "Well, these are certain questions we're willing to entertain." And then other ones, we're just not interested in talking about because we don't feel like we need to.
Yeah, I don't.
Are we getting closer to that, or is that far away?
I actually don't know. I mean, it's hard for me to get a sense of what the actual PR strategy is.
I mean, we're at the point. Yeah, not to interrupt, but we're at the point where economists are sort of evaluating. Like, you don't have to say if Amazon disappeared tomorrow, what would happen. But I mean, if Amazon made certain moves and let's just say 10,000 sellers wouldn't be able to sell overnight, I mean, that would be an economic impact. That's not just a bunch of businesses.
Yeah.
So wouldn't you say we're kind of already teasing that frontier in terms of,
Yeah. I mean, there are, you can definitely envision scenarios where, if they flip a switch, thousands of businesses go out of business overnight, right? Are those tax related thing? I mean, tax things tend to be out of Amazon's hand for the most part, but that's certainly one area. Things like returns. I mean, if you're dealing with people who sell very low margin products, and if they could imagine, 5% hit on profitability for a month, that's enough for them to close up shop.
Just a simple policy change that impacts your margins. Yeah. I'm glad you brought up taxes, right? We eventually have to address Trump tweeting about taxes in Amazon and whether they're evading taxes, whether or not they're abusing the post office. There's a lot of sort of misinformation about. Do you want to just give us kind of a quick take on? You've been working on some of these stories this week, some of it last week.
Yeah.
I don't know what the markets did today, but
I don't either, actually. I've been running around.
We've been here in Seattle. We're here in Seattle, by the way. Yeah.
So the cynical take on this, which I actually think is the accurate take, is that this is purely a personal vendetta against Jeff Bezos and the coverage of the Washington Post. This is not earth-shattering news that I'm sharing. This is Well, the New York Times even, I believe, had a headline over the weekend with Trump. It might be personal with something like that.
Yeah.
Might be.
Two titans kind of battling it out, and we're watching this happen. Right? So
there is no indication that he actually cares that much about Amazon putting small retailers out of business, right? I mean,
or large ones like Toys R Us.
Yeah, I mean, he's never gone after Walmart. He's never gone after Target. He's never gone after Alibaba.
Right.
Yeah.
All companies selling online with marketplaces. Yep.
In fact, the last time he addressed Alibaba, it was quite positive, right? When Jack Ma visited him at the Trump Tower during the transition period. So it's kind of, I mean, with Trump, it's the cynical answer often is the right one.
There's something personal or there's something selfish going on, right?
The thing,
why should that impact the entire economy?
Yeah, I mean,
or the stock market?
With taxes, like if you kind of try to parse the tweets, it generally seems like he doesn't understand what taxes he's talking about. Like he's saying that they're not paying their fair share of taxes,
right?
Which is a very different issue than collecting sales tax,
right?
But the sales tax issue is the one that is the reason they're on the hot seat.
Galvanizes a lot of interest among sellers, especially.
The way that he's trying to project this, I think, is Amazon is getting this huge subsidy and not paying its fair share of taxes. Meanwhile, Corner Joe store is paying his or her fair share of taxes and is going out of business.
Right. It's an unfair advantage. It's posited as an unfair advantage. So the question is, do they do other things to earn advantages? Or should you have a level playing field?
And
I guess
by all means, I mean there is plenty of room to criticize criticize Amazon's tax treatment without question.
Right.
I mean, we could
in
have
different states. Overall,
the fact that they, because of the way that corporate income taxes are set up, they pay very little because they have very little profit. That's a huge advantage.
Right. Which those are things Trump understands pretty well, right? He's got a lifetime of...
You would think he understands this well, but it seems like he is conflating all these, and maybe he's doing it intentionally because broadly his support base doesn't, I mean, most people don't get these nuances. Right. I enjoy the discourse around where where taxes are headed, and we don't know, and we've got a Supreme Court case. That is not where this debate is taking place, and we're kind of trying to round peg square hole this.
Yeah, I get that mixed up sometimes myself, but I mean, and some of it's just chasing your own tail, right? At what point is it we have to cover this because Trump's doing it versus does anyone take a step back and say, well, we kind of wrote the same story yesterday?
Well, it's important. It's important in that he has knocked many billions of dollars of market cap off the company. Right. Amazon is roughly 3% of the S&P 500, and is the best performer in terms of increased market cap over the last 12 months by far. So it has a follow-on. It's not just Amazon investor. I mean, if you're investing in the S&P 500, and he tweets about Amazon, you're taking a financial hit. Right? So these are big. It's a big deal when he does it. It's also a big deal in that it's just this is not precedent because he's been doing it before, so he's following a precedent that he set. But just this notion that we can pick on companies, we can sort of pick winners and losers. I mean, other presidents have been criticized for picking winners and losers, that is.
I mean, it's kind of business interference, right? You're not supposed to be personally profiting from these things, of course, but what about your cronies and colleagues and friends? And they're not supposed to be either, right?
Yeah.
So,
just the notion of publicly shaming or publicly attacking a large publicly traded company is just anathema to what the presidency is. But again, a lot of things are anathema.
Here's a kind of a left field question with the HQ2 conversation still going on. Do you think, since Washington, D.C. or the D.C. metro area, Northern Virginia, Maryland, whatever you want to call it, do you think Jeff Bezos wants to be closer to the seat of power, even if it's just geographically closer, beyond all the money spent on lobbying that Amazon's doing right now? Do you think with Trump in the White House, who knows, maybe for another 4 years, beyond these 2.5, 3 to go. Do you think that's going to give that area, that metro region, a distinct advantage that he can't get if he takes Newark or Atlanta or Austin?
Yeah. So I mean, I purely have sort of analysis and hypothesis here. I've done very little reporting on where this is actually headed.
Right. No, just your opinion based on what you see.
I mean, he has a house in the DC area. He's got the Washington Post. He spends more time there. One thing I have looked at recently is job openings in Amazon job openings, and Herndon, Virginia has the second most openings of any after Seattle of any city in the US.
I didn't know that.
That's largely AWS government contracts.
Right.
So that's a huge business, and it's it's a big reason for them to be there.
Right.
That said, I don't know if they're already hiring this many people there. I don't know that they need.
It's hard to say.
Right?
I mean, I know in Boston, where I'm based, they're hiring. They're getting more office space in the Seaport area, which is growing. But are they sort of just capping it, or is that just a first step? I mean, there's no way to know. They need a big campus area, which in cities like Boston can be kind of hard to come by unless you're a little out. So DC,
I mean, one thing I would be really interested in knowing if I were sort of covering the kind of minutia of how this is all playing out is, I suspect, and I've talked to some tech executives in some of the cities that are on that list of 20. This is not a cut and dry deal. I mean, there is a lot of business executives that would be very nervous about having Amazon come in their backyard with the prospects of hiring every single engineer.
That's true. Luring people away.
50-mile radius, with the ability to pay significantly more.
Stock options, lucrative. Poaching people. That's right. They must have been quite concerned.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about. I mean, some of these cities, the biggest companies employ. Or the companies that have the most technical talent have 2,000 to 3,000 developers.
Right.
Amazon could suck that up 10 times
in
over,
a weekend.
Right? This is not one of those things that everyone is excited about.
Have you talked to Mark Laurie at all? Have you talked to Walmart executives in terms of counter moves that? I mean, obviously some of this would be off the record, but people I think are watching Walmart more. I mean, Walmart's already sort of making noise in the healthcare space just to counter Amazon there. I don't know how real or legitimate that is so far, but are they going to make more of a push to kind of win over the hearts and minds of Amazon sellers to do at least more business on Walmart than they do right now?
Well, you would have, I think, better insight into that than I would, because because I imagine sellers would be hearing from them. I haven't done that much reporting on that.
Walmart,
I've been surprised at how little I've been hearing. I would have thought that that Walmart with Mark Laurie with Jet would have taken full advantage of the sort of the Amazon backlash that's been taking place over the last
and the resource to Walmart, right?
And in fact, I mean, I do know of sellers who. I mean, it is one of the questions I ask when when people say that they're done with Amazon. They're selling the rest of their inventory and then they're off. Where do you want to go? I was like, well, I'm doing direct. I've got some distribution partners. I would love to go to Walmart, but they're not ready for prime time.
Or they're not being pursued as much. I mean, there should be some maybe incentives that you wouldn't get from Amazon that Walmart could provide. I don't hear that either. So sometimes I kind of wonder if I'm just not keyed into it, since I'm, last decade, kind of every day has been about Amazon, but are there things going on kind of quietly, reaching out to people, larger Amazon sellers, like, hey, do you want to sell a little bit more in Walmart? And,
I mean, I think we forget the size. In thinking about that, it seems like there's nothing should be too big for Walmart, but the size of Amazon's logistics operation and the number of fulfillment centers they have and the amount of money they've poured into their logistics system, I just, can Walmart ever catch up with that, right? I mean, the amount
it would take a while.
The amount of technical talent they would need just to build something comparable, in addition to building, in addition to adding all the fulfillment centers.
And the customer trust in .com versus walking into a Walmart too. That doesn't come up so much, but I mean, you have to kind of build that out as well, right? So,
I mean, it almost feels like they would have to use more of their existing infrastructure, the existing way they deal with brands selling into Walmart today, and you sort of now that we have it in house, we can sell it. But yeah, it doesn't. I mean, when we think about Amazon's market dominance, when it comes to just pure online volume, that's where it just feels like a monopoly. I mean,
right. What's the next move?
Yeah.
Just keep growing and growing
I'm not
and growing until
calling it a
somebody else-
monopoly, but that's where it feels like one.
No, it's all right. I am checking questions, by the way. I'm weaving them into the discussion as much as I can. Bring more of them to us. There's one here. Do you know on what grounds third-party sellers may be completely terminated from the marketplace? So maybe I'll spin that to, do you hear from people who are like, I think I'm dead and I can't come back, and they sort of go to you maybe for help, like, can you publicize my story so we can at least get the feel-good part of it out there, or some part of it so I can have a hook to go back to Amazon because they're not even talking to me anymore?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know how many of those you get. But
I get a decent amount, probably a tiny sliver of a fraction of them.
Right. But is there any, like, if you actually approached media relations and said, hey, can you look into just this one account? I've heard from this one person. They just want to know, I mean, should they even contact Amazon anymore? Is there any way they can have a conversation, some hook of something?
I mean, if I ask my contacts at Amazon, what advice should I give to this person?
Right.
It's totally generic. It's like seller,
review why you were suspended and come up with a better plan.
There's no specific details. The people get suspended for all sorts of reasons, and sometimes they make sense. Often they don't.
I mean, sometimes it's recoverable if it's done properly.
Yeah,
but they've just talked to the wrong people. It's been mishandled. Yeah. Right. Sometimes it's not really recoverable from the beginning.
I mean,
because of the nature of the offense. Right.
I mean, one thing I've encountered a decent amount of is people who have various seller accounts that they've set up over the years, not because they're trying to do anything nefarious or trying to get around the system, but because when they've had a problem with their existing account that they genuinely want resolved, they can't get it resolved. And think that if they're doing something that's not above board, they're not sure what it is. And so they end up like trying to, the only way they can sell is by creating another login. And then they have a problem 2 years later, and Amazon says, well, the problem is you have multiple seller accounts. And
it comes up down the road once they've had a reason to, once investigators have had a reason to look at the accounts, they might bring something like that up.
Yeah, why do you have all these accounts?
But
as if people are
they want a do-over, right? I mean, they're looking for, they either made their own do-over and nobody caught it at the time, or they just want a clean start because maybe they've reorganized their business. Maybe they've got different partners, different financials. I mean, which some of those are legitimate reasons, but part of the problem becomes they don't know how to approach like seller performance to get approval for this stuff, and they're afraid to approach them because they think they'll trigger something and get closed down prematurely, and then they've got, they've added to their woes. So I mean, they come to me with those questions. I'm sure they come to you. And, I mean, sometimes. Have you heard from anybody who's gotten gotten this done?
And I mean, I'd be interested in knowing from you. I mean, the sense I get is, if I'm a seller and I've had ongoing issues for the last 3 months, is all the details from the calls that I've had kept in a single place where someone can just log in and see the call log? Like, is there a kind of a general CRM system? And I don't know. I don't get the sense that there is. I mean,
there are annotations on accounts that account investigators like I used to be can see. I mean, depending on how far back you go and what you're looking at, you don't look at everything every time all the time. I didn't have a lot of interaction with seller support. This is kind of a conversation we can have about communication because I'm still hearing from sellers who are like, well, I did my appeal. I just haven't heard from them. Where did it go? Oh, I sent it to seller support, or I was talking. Like, everyone wants to get on the phone. Yeah. But you can't just hop on the phone with my former teams. Who can you hop on the phone with? Right. Seller support. But sometimes you just get an answer from them. It might not be the right answer. It might not fit your case. They might be talking about something they had discussed in a previous conversation that day that seems similar. But that's seller support. They don't have like authority over your account.
And often they don't have context for what's going on.
Yeah, they don't have, and they're probably not scrolling through all your account annotations. Maybe they're looking at the most recent, or, some people don't even know if they have access or not. They're kind of lower level lesser trained employees, and they're giving you an answer because they have to. You're on the phone. They can't just give you dead air. And they can't really say that they don't know.
Yeah.
So they're giving you an answer, but then I don't think Amazon understands, or seller support understands, that you're hanging all your hopes on this answer, and you're home writing a plan based on some of that information, which might be good. It might be something you can work from, but it might not be the whole story.
Yeah.
You know, and then there's this whole, well, I communicated with seller support and seller performance, so there's different channels of communication. You know, and here's my case ID. Did seller performance go into the case and look? No, it takes a long time to scroll through all of that and figure out what you talk to them about.
Yeah.
And so then you've got two sides kind of, I mean, that's one reason I exist in this space. You've got two stakeholders, if you will, that are kind of talking past each other from the beginning. Yeah. You know?
Well, and so, you know, in the cases where people generally are willing to go on the record with me, they generally feel like they have nothing left to lose, right? Like the concern about going on the record is that you're going to ruin your relationship.
Retribution.
If you feel like you have nothing left to lose, possibly something to gain, or at the very least, people should hear the story. That's when people tend to go on the record. At that point, most of the people I've talked to have they've had it with trying to get a hold of Amazon, right? So then what happens is I detail it, give the details to the PR person, and then someone they want time to have someone in investigations, or someone in that ether reach out to the seller and walk through some of this stuff. And again, the seller at this point is like, I'm done. I don't need to talk to anyone else, right? This is it's it's person number 17 in the last.
Well, maybe they want to know if you have talked to Jeff before, because they're writing so many emails to jeff@amazon.com, and eventually, since that's turned into more of just a regular email queue, they don't get a response from that. And so they're like, well, if you can't write to Jeff, who can you write to? You know?
I don't know when that stopped being effective.
Well, I mean, Jeff was known for reading emails from, I mean, not just sellers, buyers and sellers. And then, of course, adding the question mark, if he was like, what happened here? That was delegated back down to people like me, who, those were the Bezos escalations. We had to look into them. And of course, we're replying to, in my case, the seller, but we're also replying to people, Jeff's assistants. And I mean, we put a lot of care and attention into those, but they were much more rare in those days. Not everyone in the world was writing to Jeff at Amazon. Now, if people don't get an answer from seller performance within 24 hours and they're suspended, they write to Jeff. It's like all kind of prematurely, sort of jumping that track, and then they're kind of, hobbling themselves by doing that.
And those emails, I would imagine, are typically emotional.
I mean, well, sometimes you have to sort of filter those out. And they're doing it, maybe they don't realize that on the other side, investigators are filtering that out too. So if there's only this much left after they filtered out all this, then there's not much for them to go on, and your escalation is kind of just a regular, ordinary email at that point. And a lot of people just kind of don't understand those dynamics. So I'd imagine they, I wrote to Jeff and he didn't write back. Doesn't he get back to buyers or, Amazon customers? We had another question. What do you think of the possible short and long-term effects of Amazon of the recent political attacks? I mean, back to the Trump stuff, but do you think this is, we got another 2.5, 3 years to go of the current presidency. Do you think this is just going to keep every other week? There's going to be, another one of these attacks. You can't just attack the Washington Post every single day of your life. You eventually have to start looking for other targets, right?
Yeah, and I mean, Trump's attention span is he gets glued to something, and then until he's moved on to the next thing.
Is he more likely to do these tweets if he sees the traction in the markets and he sees that it's having a big impact? Is he less likely? I've made my point, I'm going to ease off, or is he more likely because he smells blood in the water?
I mean, I sort of imagine that there's a certain rush that he gets seeing Amazon stock fall 5% after he tweets, but then the market goes down 2%, right? And that's counterproductive to the whole message. So I don't, you have to connect those dots at some point.
Adrenaline.
As a column I did the other day, it was like it would make much more sense if he were attacking Amazon on China. Right. That would fit perfectly with his agenda. If you're going to look for a single company out there that has taken advantage of the trade imbalance between the U.S. and China, Amazon is the poster child. Well, for whatever reason, that hasn't come to the fore.
That's your next story, maybe.
Well, no, I mean, I did the I'm sure there's more to say, but
right.
but I think the nuances of Amazon's business practices can create problems for them.
Mm-hmm.
The question is, are they actually going to do the work to dig into those nuances? Like, when,
or do they have to do the work?
Well, so
I mean, can they just sort of ride it out? Like, this guy's not going to be president forever,
right? So,
you
so to me, the way that something would be like, will the regulators do something to Amazon?
Mm-hmm.
To me, the answer to that question is: are they going to do the work to find the things where they could actually hang a case, right? Because you can't hang a case on antitrust; they don't own enough of the overall retail market,
right.
Or traditional antitrust. In fact, my colleague Alex Sherman just did a story or piece today for what are the things that the government could actually go after Amazon for. They could get in the way of any big acquisitions, right? They've shown their willingness to interfere with acquisitions. So to me, the question is, what are the anti-competitive practices that Amazon pursues, and would regulators do the work to dig into those? And to me, it's, is Amazon contracting with manufacturers, for example, is Amazon contracting with manufacturers in China, copying products of small businesses on the platform that don't want to give Amazon the kinds of terms that Amazon wants? Right? Do you have an inventor that Amazon would love to have a vendor relationship with you?
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to agree to their terms. You would do a 3P relationship. They're not interested in that. They go contract with a manufacturer in China and undercut you by 10%. Maybe there's infringement, maybe there's not.
Right.
But it sounds anti-competitive.
And
but is it? I don't know. Maybe it's just the way that, maybe it's just capitalism.
I mean, not a lot of this gets adjudicated. I mean, people are regularly dragging Amazon into court on these things.
Yeah.
I mean, are regulators ever going to go through the terms of service? Do they have the incentive to? I mean, maybe if it's adjudicated, they'd have additional. I don't know. I never hear about these things in the pipeline. Maybe you do.
Are there any very wealthy corporate lawyers out there who want to take on a bunch of pro bono cases with the prospect of a big payday down the line, but with it because they feel that Amazon is a dangerous force for the future, right?
I mean, maybe, do you think that there's more pressure when there's like a social media fiasco, like the hoverboards, or product safety issues? Like, there's too many counterfeits on Amazon, and also some of those items are unsafe, and it could be a consumable, like nobody can safely ingest it, or it could be like electronics. This item overheats, it's a fire hazard, things like that. Because it only takes a few of those that make it to social media, and we all understand the concept of what goes viral and what doesn't. That does have an impact. I mean, they react to those types of stories to the point where policy, internal practices, and standard operating procedures do change. There's precedent for that. So is that the strongest way of getting a message through?
So I think, if nothing else, what some of this trumpeting has done is it's raised that it's put Amazon in the middle of the conversation in a way that it is not positive. So if we're having this conversation now and there's a really bad story that comes out in the not too distant future about something that consumers really care about, and it reflects very negatively on Amazon's marketplace, then you start to pile on, right? I mean, I think what Facebook is...
Facebook, right? Best example currently.
Right. So, as if Facebook wasn't in enough trouble just based on all the revelations about how the Russians manipulated
the election.
And then the Cambridge Analytica story comes out. Now, then that's when people start thinking about, can this platform survive, right? Is this is this fundamentally broken? And you could piece together things about Amazon that would make you raise those same questions. Amazon is a far more diverse company than Facebook. Facebook is, almost 100% reliant on social media ads. And
of course, I mean, Facebook's a great example, because what are the odds that Facebook would see millions of users delete their accounts? I mean, I actually don't know how many people claim to have deleted their accounts since this all came up. but I mean, we're promoting the Seller Velocity Conference on Facebook. We're still using it as a business tool and a communications tool. I mean, we have a Facebook group that has, you know, more than 1,000 sellers in it right now. So it's still a communication avenue for, especially for Amazon sellers, it's important.
Yeah, I mean, you know, one of the things, without going too far off Facebook lines, but one of the things that's happened since the Cambridge Analytica story is I've been getting inundated with pitches from people saying we're building a decentralized social network.
Oh, really?
Sorts,
Interesting. Yeah.
And I mean, that was starting to happen before, but that has been, you know, that pace of that has accelerated. But, you know, the thought of any single network taking on,
like
you know, millions of users, it's more of a, you know, does Facebook sort of become this public utility where we all store our photos, but we stop sort of engaging on a regular basis.
Right, just out of a public trust issue.
Yeah.
I don't know if that would ever confront Amazon. I mean, people trust certain products less if they hear a story, you know, oh, this was counterfeit, and then other people chime in like, oh yeah, mine was too. Because a lot of buyers don't understand if they're even buying from retail or a third-party seller. And I think they don't even think in terms of, is Amazon vetting these sellers on the way in? I mean, Amazon will take care of me if I get a bad product. And whether it's a bad batch from a good seller or a seller who never should have been on there to begin with, if things go wrong, I'll get my money back and I'll be taken care of. Is that enough? Or is it bad in the beginning that you even bought that product that you know, probably didn't want to take?
It you know, it certainly, the type of thing you could imagine creating a real firestorm is if someone buys baby formula and like gets sick, right? Baby gets sick, really sick.
Toys with lead, you know, that sort of thing.
The type of thing where like, it's not just enough for Amazon to, you know, give me a refund,
right?
Or like
like
$5 off,
or
$5 off my next purchase. Like the type of thing where I, as a parent, want the world to know that this is happening. Not suggesting that type of thing will happen, but you know, there are certainly enough types of products that are being sold on Amazon now with expiration dates that you could imagine it, right? So,
good example, because expiration is one of the things they've been cracking down on a lot. You know, sellers who are selling items that weren't necessarily expired, but the normal life use of the product, it would expire. You would not get through all of the pills, say, in the bottle before expiration. That was also considered expired. A lot of sellers didn't see that sort of thing coming, but it's a reaction. It's kind of a reflexive reaction to wanting to maintain that public trust and protect their buyers from potential safety concerns.
I do think, you know, buyer education on Amazon will become a bigger deal. I think like, who am I buying from, and will I only buy from the actual brand, is something I'm hearing more people talk about.
As long as they can tell when they're buying from the brand. I mean, some sellers profess to be sourcing from the brand directly. Maybe they are, maybe they aren't, right? And buyers sort of don't.
And not all brands, not all brands have vendor relationships, so sometimes you can,
Right, exactly. So, I mean, what do you think? And just, we're getting kind of the later stages of this, so I just want to see if anyone else has any questions. I'm still keeping my eye on the screen here. Now's a good time to send them in. What do you think the future of all this is, whether it's CNBC's coverage of Amazon, other media outlets? Do you think they're going to be kind of running parallel just to see, you know, what new steps they make in terms of government influence through lobbying or through acquiring new businesses? Is coverage going to change over time, or is it going to kind of continue this back and forth?
So there's a insatiable appetite for Amazon stories already, and this was true well before the latest kerfuffle with Trump. You know,
buyers and sellers, everybody, right?
Everybody. I mean, if you had a scoop on Amazon or an exclusive piece of news on Amazon, and you were CNBC or Bloomberg or Wall Street Journal or one of the tech blogs, you know, that story could lead your site certainly all day, and it could lead, you know, in terms of traffic for the week easily. So that is just, you know, there's Amazon has this sort of position in American lore right now that people just want to read as much as they can about it. The interesting thing is most of that reporting is not about core Amazon. it's about Alexa, it's about drone delivery,
right.
It's it's about artificial intelligence at AWS, or it's about
Amazon Key,
the Ring acquisition,
like delivery improvement,
and it's quite similar, actually. A few years ago, I spent a lot of time covering Google search because there were all these issues with Google changing their algorithms and how that affected business. All the reporting was was around driverless cars and fiber, and but 90% of the business or whatever was coming from online ads. So there was all this white space to cover the core business. I think that people are starting to see now more opportunities, that covering Amazon commerce isn't boring. Right? It's actually we know it's important and it's fundamentally interesting. And so I think there was probably when I was covering some of the counterfeit issues a couple of years ago, and the response, the suspensions that were resulted as a response, I didn't feel like there was anyone else out there chasing those stories, and now it feels like there are
heavy duty competition, right? And through my experience, I've seen there's Amazon beat writers at different and
I would imagine that as your business has scaled, that's probably there's probably been sort of a concomitant growth in the reporter interest.
Honestly, from my perspective, it seems like there would be on any Amazon beat writer for especially a major media outlet, there'd be pressure almost every other day to have an Amazon story of some sort. It doesn't have to be earth-shattering breaking news, but there's clearly demand out there.
I mean, the thing that I have continuously told our reporters about why this is so different, like why we should think about Amazon so much differently than we have any other tech Goliath at any other time, differently than when Microsoft was the king, or when Cisco or Oracle or IBM. It's that Amazon operates at basically zero margin, right? And all of these other companies, they weren't going to go into a new business where they were going to lose money, right? They would have these R&D centers, and the R&D centers would be a cost center by definition, but they would spin out of those various things that they would then take to market, and the intention would be to make money on those products. Amazon spins out things that they intend to lose money on, and that
they're chasing something that's worth it.
The story has been Wall Street has given them a free pass on profit for 20 plus years now. That dynamic is it's very, very scary, right? I mean, you can't. Bezos' one famous quote of your margin is my opportunity. I think I'm stating that right. It's never been more true. I mean, if we can sell something at a loss and remove any competition and have pricing control, that's great, because, by the way, our investors don't expect us to make any money. And we now have this huge cash machine with AWS that can fund all of these things.
Well-timed cash machine, from
it
2014, 2015 really started paying off, because nobody even knew or saw the numbers before that, right?
It is a formidable operation, and led by someone who's just purely Darwinian.
I mean, do you ever? I mean, the New York Times story was what, August 2015. Do you ever hear from unhappy Amazonians who obviously don't want to? They're working there. They don't want to talk on the record. But some of these other, I get questions about, like, well, you used to work there, so what was it really like? Was it like this, or was it? I mean, obviously, there's so much personal stuff that goes into that. But do you get people talking about, like, not just their personal misery working at the company, which can be purely individual, but processes that they work on, like this? Like, nobody knows this is totally broken. This needs to be fixed. This is impacting a lot of people, or even people who make tools. This tool keeps breaking. I mean, does that ever come your way? Or
unfortunately, not as much as I would like. I would have thought, having been a reporter for almost 15 years now, typically when you've done enough stories on a subject, and you've sort of shown that you have some level of authority on it, you start getting a lot of tips internally from people who are unhappy, and that happens really infrequently. Now, I think there are other Amazon reporters that probably, for whatever reason, get more of that. I mean, I get all sorts of tips from unhappy people, unhappy sellers, and unhappy software developers who have, apps that they have built on AWS.
Okay.
But Amazon would probably be very happy to know that I don't get a whole lot of leakage. Internal.
Right. Which, that would be
So if any of you are Amazon employees out there, you know where to find.
It'd be an obvious violation of their non-disclosure. But all right. Well, thanks for joining me for this.
Sure,
I'm glad we were able to put this together and answer some of your questions. If they have any other questions for you or tips or questions about selling on Amazon.
ari.levy@nbcuni.com. That's like NBC Universal, NBC UNI. Love tips. And I will try to make time to hop on the phone with you as well.
Great. And you're all attendees of the Seller Velocity Conference. We've got the April 26th New York event. Tell your friends about it, your colleagues, and any questions for me, you know where to find me. So thanks for joining us today. We appreciate your patience, and I hope you have a good evening.